This is The Scene live in Ukraine's capital, Kiev. President Zelensky says the next 24 hours will be crucial in the fight against Russia's invasion. The US says that Russia should tone down its rhetoric after Vladimir Putin places his nuclear forces on high alert.
Western countries are not only taking unfriendly steps against our country in the economic dimension, but the top officials of leading NATO countries also make aggressive statements with regards to our country.
The EU announces that it's buying weapons for Ukraine to use against Russia, calling the move a watershed moment for the bloc. And searching for a safe haven, Poland says at least 200,000 people seeking refuge have now crossed into the country from Ukraine.
The headlines for you at 6 o'clock. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the next 24 hours will be crucial as the Russian invasion enters its fifth day.
Here in Kiev, a curfew has just been lifted, a sign of normality, a long-awaited sign of normality. But for how long will it last?
Vladimir Putin puts Russia's nuclear forces on high alert over what he calls aggressive statements by the West.
Boris Johnson says Ukrainians fleeing the Russian invasion will be allowed to come to the UK, but only if they already have a close family member living here.
And the sanctions begin to bite. The Russian rouble loses around a third of its value overnight. It's a record low, leading to queues at banks and an appeal for calm. I'll have the details.
Good morning. Fury as FIFA decides Russia can still qualify for the World Cup. After days of silence, the organisation announces a series of conditions described by Russia's opponents as disgraceful.
Putin puts a nuclear force on alert, says today's Times, as the Russian invasion of Ukraine continues. That is the headline too for the FT, which says Moscow has raised the stakes as the conflict enters a fifth day. It's the same story on the front of the Telegraph and a picture of Ukrainian soldiers there defending the city of Kharkiv. Vlad nukes on standby, says the Metro, which also highlights the proposed peace talks between Russian and Ukrainian leaders. Mad Vlad goes nuclear, says today's Sun. The Star also has a picture of the Russian president on the front with their headline, "Madder than a box of frogs." The Guardian says the backlash against President Putin is growing, with a picture of an enormous anti-war protest in Berlin. The Free World versus Putin, that is on the front of the Express. Dash to the borders is the headline for the Eye as Ukrainians flee their country. The Mirror has that story too, and pictures of father and son saying a tearful goodbye at a train station.
Yes, this is the fifth morning since Russia invaded Ukraine. And if we just bring up the map here behind me, this is the overall picture. Ukraine has been under attack from the north, from Belarus, from the east, from Russia, and from the south into the southern part of Ukraine from Crimea there. Now, just to update you on the overnight situation, the early indications from Kiev is that it's been a relatively quiet night. It's not been heavily struck, and that the curfew has, in the last half or hour or so, been lifted. So for the first time, people can go outside, go to the shops, that sort of thing. Now, looking at the map, Kharkiv, that is the biggest city in eastern Ukraine. You may remember that around this time yesterday, we were reporting an incursion by Russian forces into the center of Kharkiv. Now, we understand that that has been repelled and that the city is now back under Ukrainian control, but there have been reports of explosions and fighting this morning. Now, in a phone call with Boris Johnson last night, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is reported to have said that the next 24 hours would be crucial. And if we just bring up these satellite pictures, you can see here what he was quite possibly talking about. These pictures are from the north of Kiev, and they show a 3-mile-long Russian military convoy containing tanks and various other bits of military hardware, potentially posed to launch a full-out ground assault on Kiev itself. Obviously, being on the ground like that, they are also exposed to attack from the air. Air control is vitally important. This is footage that the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine put out yesterday, showing a drone strike on a convoy, possibly even part of that convoy that we saw in the satellite pictures. It is a reminder, though, that air control is vital to this. Ukraine, if it is going to continue resisting this invasion, is going to need to make sure that it still has some control of the skies. Now, to the south, this is an area which has seen changes over the last 24 hours or so. Russia moved in from Crimea, which it seized in 2014, and it has been moving east towards Mariupol in the hope of joining up with this other area over here. This is the separatist, or the so-called separatist-controlled areas of eastern Ukraine. And in the last part of yesterday evening, it became clear that they had managed to take the town of Berdyansk, one of the two ports on the Sea of Azov, and are now closing in on the biggest city in that area, Mariupol. Potentially, Mariupol may be at threat in the next 24 hours or so. So just moving on, another thing that may be happening today is peace talks. Well, this is the room that has been set up in Belarus in a town called Homel, which is not far from the border. Ukraine has been invited for talks with the Russians. They are expected to sit down here. It's not going to be Ukraine's president, and indeed Ukraine's president has been playing down expectations for what might be achieved in those discussions. So we will be watching closely to see whether indeed Russia and Ukraine do sit down for the first time since this conflict started last week.
Jonah, thanks very much indeed. Interesting, isn't it, that we know the curfew has lifted just in the last half hour or so. So hopefully we'll find out through the morning how life is going to change just a little bit for the people who've been living under those conditions.
Yeah, I think in many ways for people in Kiev, this will be a breathing space for them, an opportunity to, you know, walk the dog, go to the grocery store, do all those sort of things that they may not have prepared for. It doesn't necessarily mean that the risk of violence has significantly changed.